water loop.
Welcome to Waterloop, the podcast that explores solutions for sustainability and equity in water. I'm the host, Travis Loop. This episode is part of a series, Mississippi by Nature, that looks at the use of nature-based solutions to help the river and its communities. The series is supported by the Walton Family Foundation and outfitted by Patagonia. Flooding and water quality degradation are significant challenges in Iowa's agricultural-dominated watersheds, driven by intensive farming practices and increasingly extreme weather events. Relay cropping, a regenerative farming practice, offers a solution by keeping soil covered and living roots in the ground year-round to reduce runoff and improve soil health. Plus, it provides another source of revenue for farmers. This episode showcases how farmer-driven innovation and partnerships are advancing nature-based solutions to benefit both agriculture and waterways. First, I talked to Ross Evelsizer of Northeast Iowa Resource Conservation and Development to learn about water challenges and the practice of relay cropping.
When we're looking at, trying to attack, pretty large-scale problems such as flooding or water quality at, a large watershed scale. So we're in the Turkey River watershed today. It's over 1 million acre watershed. And so, a lot of people are familiar with the fact that Iowa is an agricultural state. So most of our watersheds are in ag production, and that drives our economy, and we want that to continue. But there are some side effects with that. And so we see, increases in runoff when we get heavy rain events, especially when there's not a crop present in the field. So we have a short growing season. So most of our crops, most farmers in Iowa are planting corn and soybeans. And so those crops are only really present from late May, early June through August, and then they start to senesce, and then they're harvested in the early fall. And so the rest of the time those fields are bare. And so if we get heavy rain events during that time, it's liable to cause the rivers to come up badly. The other side of it, on the water quality side, if those plants aren't there to tie up nutrients, fertilizers being applied to the field, those nutrients are then able to move either through the water or through attached to sediment, in the case of phosphorus. So what we try to do with the relay cropping, and this is kind of like built off of previous solutions like no-till and cover crops. And essentially with relay cropping, you're planting a cereal grain in the fall, right after harvest. So now you have a plant that's already growing and present in the fall. Winter comes and that plant is actually still there. It doesn't die, but it doesn't grow in the winter, but it doesn't die. So you still have a living root in the soil over the winter, and then as soon as that snow melts in the spring, that plant is there to start growing again. And then soybeans are planted into that in the springtime, and then both crops are then present in the field together. And so that's kind of it's one crop handing off to the second crop. And so what that does is it keeps the living root in the soil. It provides more coverage. So instead of having gaps in the rows where weeds can grow and things like that, you have a different plant there taking up that space. Soybeans are a legume. Cereal grains are a grass. And so those two play nice together. So they're complementary. So they don't compete necessarily except for light and water. As long as there's plenty of those things, which we can adjust to in terms of row spacing for light, and we're typically blessed with plenty of water in this area. We usually have too much, and so those two plants are able to grow together. The cereal grain then is harvested usually in midsummer, in July sometime, and then the soybeans go on and are harvested in a typical time frame.
How long has this been going on? What's the time frame of this relay cropping approach?
Well, if you really look at it, since we've done agriculture, right? So the Native Americans did something similar in the Three Sisters with squash and beans and corn, right? So this is sort of a spin-off of that. However, now we're doing it with giant equipment and in modern agriculture, right? So, and it hasn't really been done for a long time. So this is really a solution that allows farmers to sort of grow vertically A lot of times farmers are looking to add more acres to their operation to grow. This allows farmers to actually grow within the acres that they have and add a second crop. It adds another revenue source. It adds adaptability to changing weather conditions, and it also provides them, it helps the soil be more sustainable and grow that soil health on their farm. So in modern agriculture, relay cropping really hasn't been happening for very long. So we really started looking at this after being on Loran's farm and seeing him do it, and then learning that there are a few other farmers around the world that are doing this. And so we started to look into it more deeply in 2018. Was our first grant-funded project to actually do trials and look at it. And since that time, we've done over 35 trials on farms across the state of Iowa, mostly looking at, the agronomic side of it. How does it pencil out from yield and the money side of it, but also the environmental side? How does it impact soil health and water quality?
Do you have any data or even anecdotes, stories to share on, on especially that water side of it?
One of the things that we're working on with the American Flood Coalition and the Iowa Flood Center in particular is looking how this could impact flooding. And so, the reason that we get large-scale floods is we typically get multiple rounds of rain and then at some point get a very heavy rain. And so, flooding is a natural process. It happens. It's part of the process. But the extent of flooding that we've had in this state in particular is unprecedented in nowadays. And some of that is due to changing climate conditions with more intense rainfalls, heavier rainfalls when we do get them. And then also our landscape is differently. So what we're trying to do is get the soil to be able to, hold that water more readily like a sponge, but then also be able to, when it, over time, have more space available. So when we get a heavy rain, it's able to take that in more quickly. And then also, over time, it's able to hold more water. So spatially and temporally, that makes a big difference. What the Flood Center has allowed us to do is actually see what it would take to impact these problems, right? So through hydrologic modeling, and so it takes a lot of acres to be put in this. And so relay cropping allows us to work with a lot of farmers over a lot of acres and work in the field versus trying to work at the edge of the field and catch runoff as it's coming off.
Well, you talked about kind of watershed scale impacts, and I think that's fascinating that you're looking at it that way. And okay, if we want to create positive change in this watershed, you have to scale up to this certain amount. You have to have it happening on this number of acres, whatever it might be.
Absolutely.
And it was interesting, Loran talking about the decrease in water coming out of his drains versus other neighbors that weren't doing relay cropping, just really kind of seeing his soil being able to hold more water. That must be part of the exciting thing. Yeah.
Well, one of the things that we've seen is through data collected here, we're able to take that and say if every farm, so if you assume every farm in the watershed is conventional agricultural now, and we know the kind of how that handles runoff, and you changed everything to relay cropping or a similar regenerative practice, based on the data that we've collected here, we know that we could actually reduce flooding by up to 25% in these watersheds, which is that is a very, very huge statistic. We're still collecting a lot of water quality data, trying to figure out how much it impacts that. But we know on farms that farmers that are doing relay cropping across the state are applying less synthetic fertilizer. They're eliminating many times herbicide, pesticides, fungicides when they're doing this practice. So we know we're going to get less nutrients. We just haven't been able to quantify it yet. We're working on that actually right now with Iowa State University. And then the other big one is the economics of it, and that's what's such a selling point to producers. So we know from this practice, based on the trials that we've done, that producers doing relay cropping versus just growing soybeans in that field like they normally would actually make, after all the bills are paid, actually make over $50 an acre more per acre than if they just grew soybeans in that field.
Sure. With a lot of conservation practices, farmers have to have often land out of production for buffer strips or whatever it might be, and they have to be financially compensated through USDA or other kinds of programs. But it seems like relay cropping is probably not something that has to get funded like that. It's more of they can get the financial reward by doing this. Is that how it's working?
Absolutely. So, and that's what I guess drew us to this project. Cover crops, no-till are very good practices, and farmers are definitely encouraged to do those things. Much of that is driven by NRCS or federally, and Iowa Department of Ag and Land Stewardship also pays for cover crop practices, but those are incentive-based programs. The idea being that a farmer will take on that program and then continue it after the cost share goes away. That does, some of that happens and some of it doesn't. But again, being able to look at what it actually takes, how many acres we need to get into a sustained, adopted practice permanently, we need more acres faster. And we don't have the money to put into those programs to do that at scale. And so solutions like this, we don't have to pay producers. They can do it on their own. And perhaps that's our best data point. So many of our trials have been 20 to 40 acres. And most of those producers, it was the first time they'd ever done relay cropping. The guys that have come back a couple of times are now still doing a trial with us on 20 to 40 acres, but they're also doing 100, 200, 300 acres of relays on their own without any sort of compensation.
Next, I spoke with Loran Steinlage of FLOLO Farm in West Union, Iowa, about why he adopted relay cropping and the benefits for his business and water.
I think it was about 2013, I heard a friend of mine in Fort Atkinson, Wisconsin was doing what they called relay cropping, and started learning and understanding, and I quickly realized all the equipment we had for interseeding was the same stuff we were going to need for relay cropping. Now, relay cropping is where we plant a cereal crop in the fall and then follow up with a soy crop in the spring or a pulse crop in the spring, and then July we'll harvest the cereal crop, and the fall we'll harvest the soybean crop.
But they are growing in the same space.
Same time frame. The way we do it, we start out with paired rows for the cereal rye. That gives us a gap for the 30-inch soybeans to go in there. And the main reason we're doing the way we do is for seed quality. I mean, everything we're producing is for seed quality. So, some guys are doing solid seeded cereal crop, solid seeded soybeans, and you're going to drive on some crop. What we've noticed over the years is that'll affect the maturity of the cash crop, and that'll affect our seed germ and stuff like that. So everything we do, we try to avoid driving on the cash crop at the time.
And so this relay cropping, big picture, what's the benefit for you as a farmer and as a business?
Well, overall, the biggest picture is, we've learned how to make cash flow. With a good relay crop, we can easily compete with 250 bushel an acre corn in a corn growing region. That's the, when you look around here, it's corn or soybeans. Yeah. And, corn sets the cash rent price here. So everything I have to do has to compete with, that 250. And the way things are going the last couple of years, we probably better start figuring out if we can compete with 300 bushel an acre corn, because, the weather patterns we're in right now seem to be favoring corn production. With the relay cropping, the last 2-3 years between late frost, early frost, drought, we've still been making good cash flow, but we just haven't been hitting them highs that we like to, but it's Mother Nature doing her thing.
So that relay cropping really helps. I mean, it helps you bump up your production. Yes. So you can get to that.
I can't justify growing straight cereal crops here and make cash rent. Well, I used to say that, but then this year, that's one of the other things why our system is evolved. We can adapt to Mother Nature. This year I probably had the best setup I've ever had for relay cropping, but then it started raining, and 42 inches of rain later, we just, I'm not going to sacrifice a perfectly good cereal crop. I'm not going to sacrifice the waterways, the land. If we go to that field later on here, you'll see, it was just a nightmare moisture-wise. I mean, we had tile blowing out everywhere, and, the simple option for us was we just canned the relay crop, just went straight cereal crop, harvested 50 bushel an acre rye, very low input, And then we backed up and pulled off 3.5 bales an acre to make cash flow. Even with that system, you know, is it the plan A, plan B? No, but we still, it gives us options to help learn and understand and make good cash flow without crop insurance and stuff like that.
Well, you know, you mentioned the waterways and the water. What's the benefit on that side of doing relay cropping?
The biggest thing we noticed early on, we started noticing it with the interseeding and that we had started building our water holding capacity in our soil. And, you know, that's where we started working with the Flood Coalition and stuff like that, trying to document what's going on our farm. You know, I think it was 2014, we started noticing that our tile lines didn't run near as much as the neighbors. Well, when I see and hear stuff like that, I want to set back and say, okay, what are we doing different that my neighbors are not doing? You know, we were doing tile line monitoring and that at that point already, and the only time our tile line would run is when we had over a 2-inch rain. And then they would run for a short spurt and stop, where all my neighbors were running continuously. You know, so it took me quite a while to put a number to that, but then I finally learned how to do a water holding capacity test where we could actually document some of our land is holding over 50% of what our neighbors' soils were. You know, fast forward to working with RC&D, they brought out the weather stations and stuff like that. You know, then we started getting hard numbers that show that we're getting the infiltration fast, we're holding the water, and then we're not losing it. You know, to me, the big picture is, you know, that's how we're going to eliminate floods and stuff like that. You know, downstream, you know, town is right east of me. My runoff goes right through town, right into a trout stream and all that. You know, so that brought it full circle when, you know, all of a sudden they called one day and said, hey, can we come out and check if you got trout in your stream? It's like, well, let's see. And, you know, here it turns out we have native trout in our creek out in the open, not in a wooded area or stuff like that. Yeah. You know, so that's been, you know, every time we've checked, it's been a drought. And even in stagnant water pools, we still got trout. Yeah. Wow. You know, so to me, that's the ultimate test we can go with that shows we got water quality and it's working.
Last, I had a conversation with Kate Giannini of the Iowa Flood Center about how relay cropping can reduce flooding and how to expand the practice.
The regenerative agriculture and multi-cropping is something that's newer in the sense that there's not a lot of adopters within the state of Iowa, but it's becoming more popular. And having farmers like Loran being those early adopters and being those innovators really helps. And the Flood Center got involved because there isn't a whole lot of data on what the improvements are by having multi-crops in an operation, having something growing year-round, and what is it doing below the surface to build that soil profile and building organic matter, which is going to increase the infiltration rate and be able to store more water before it runs off the surface. I think what's really exciting about gathering the research and the data is being able to communicate that out to others. Now you have the science behind it, and that's going to help not only just from an academic perspective, but also from that peer-to-peer farming, that that farmer-to-farmer network that Loran is doing. So he has the numbers to back up his operation and his management decisions. That by multi-cropping or doing regenerative agriculture, I'm building that organic matter for generations to come, and I'm building that capacity within that soil that is going to be able to infiltrate more water when we're having these intense rainfall events. At the early onset of the research that we've discovered at the field level, about 40% of the intense rainfall events that we are seeing on his farm are infiltrating instead of running off. And that's a huge impact to our local water bodies. And now it's a question of scale. So how do we scale that up? And I think using Loran's voice and with the backing of the science will be helpful in communicating the benefits of this practice.
Gathering data is a big key piece. What are you doing here at FLOLO Farms to try to learn more?
We have installed 2 hydro weather stations, one on a regenerative agricultural field that he's farming with sustainable practices, and the other one is more of a conventional, just corn bean type of field operation. And that's just to kind of look at the differences between the soil moisture, the soil temperature, and also look at flood and drought forecasting at different farm operations. So the hydro weather stations, they collect rainfall data, wind speed, wind direction, and then soil temperature and soil moisture at 2, 4, 8, and 20 inches of depth. So we're collecting a lot of data to see what's going on within that soil profile. It's our hope, the Iowa Flood Center's hope, to expand the hydro weather stations across the state of Iowa to have one in every county. I think there's a lot of challenges to scale this up because no field is the same. So I think there's going to be, a lot more learning needs to occur, and but also creating networks to further communicate what's the operation and why it's important. And I think also Loran would probably say just the systems, finding different markets to market different crops. I think that's been difficult, and I think there are a lot of innovative ways in that Loran is kind of tapping into that a little bit to grow different crops besides just a corn bean rotation that we see here in Iowa. But you had to develop those markets.
You're in the water loop.